Premananda Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories the assembled devotees. All glories the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Go Premananda Hari 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 Bol. Alrighty. I think we're ready to go. So, Om Gana Timidanda Shah Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmeditam Yena Tasmai Shi Gurave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. So we continue with our study of the Sri Caitanya Charitamrta, and today we're going to start with the 10th chapter in the Madhya Lila of the Sri Caitanya Charitamrta, which deals with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's return to Jagannath Puri. And if you remember from the 9th chapter in the Madhya Lila, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has just returned from a South India tour at the end of the 9th chapter, and he's been greeted by all the different devotees, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and other devotees. So let's continue. Let's see if this, whoops, let there be light. So let's continue with our study. We are in our farm community known as New Taliban in Mississippi. We have several thousand acres of land here, cows, and all sorts of beautiful things. Very, very hot, but I am sitting in an air-conditioned room. So, Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Okay, so chapter 10 is entitled The Lord's Return to Jagannath Puri, excuse me. So we'll read the chapter summary. While Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling in South India, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had many talks with King Prataparuja. King Prataparuja was in charge of not only Orissa, but actually all the way down to Madras, or Chennai as it's called today. So quite a large territory. When Maharaj Prataparuja, and he was a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he was the king. So we're going to hear how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very reluctant to talk to a materialistic person of the law. Of course, he wasn't materialistic, but because he had the title of king, then it's like a drop of poison. So Maharaj Prataparuja requested the Bhattacharya to arrange an interview with the Lord. The Bhattacharya assured him that he would try to do so as soon as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returned from South India. When the Lord returned to Jagannath Puri from his South Indian tour, he lived at the house of Kashi Mishra. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya introduced many Vaishnavas to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu after his return. The father of Ramananda Roy. Bhavananda Roy offered him another son named Vaninath Potanyayaka for the Lord's service. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu informed his associates about the pollution of Krishnadas brought about by his association with the Bhattaharis. And of course, if you remember the story, Krishnadas was Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associate or servant, and he got dragged away by this group of gypsies in South India who use ladies to lure him away. and Lord Chaitanya had to go and rescue him. And all the Bhattaharis of the gypsies there, they tried to attack Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Lord Chaitanya arranged the weapons of these gypsies, turned on the gypsies themselves, and cut them to pieces. Haribol. So don't try to attack Lord Chaitanya. And thus the Lord proposed to give him leave. In other words, get away. Nityananda Prabhu sent Krishnadas to Bengal to inform the Navadvip devotees about the Lord's return to Jagannath. In other words, Lord Nityananda was more merciful than Lord Chaitanya, because Lord Chaitanya said, I don't want to see him. But Lord Nityananda thought, I want to engage him in Krishna's service, and Lord Chaitanya's service, because he's a devotee, even though he had some spiritual trouble. All the devotees of Navadvip thus began arranging to come to Jagannath Puri. At this time, Paramananda Puri was at Navadvip, and immediately upon hearing news of the Lord's return, he started for Jagannath Puri, accompanied by a Brahmin named Kamalakanta. Purushottama Bhattacharya, resident of Navadvip, was educated at Varanasi. He accepted the renounced order from Chaitanya Nanda, but he took the name of Swarup. Thus he arrived at the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. After the demise of Sri Ishwarapuri, his disciple Govinda, following his instructions, that means Ishwarapuri's instructions, went to serve Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Due to his relationship with Keshava Bharti, Brahmananda Bharti was also respectfully received by Sri Chaitanya. When he arrived at Jagannath Puri, he was advised to give up the deerskin clothing he wore. These are all summaries, so we're going to hear more about this later when we read this actual chapter. When Brahmananda understood Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu correctly accepted him as Krishna himself. However, when Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya addressed Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Krishna, the Lord immediately protested. In the meantime, Kashishvara Goswami came to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In this chapter, devotees from many different areas came to see Chaitanya. And they are exactly like many rivers that come from many places to finally flow into the sea. Okay. Tam vande gora jaladam swashayo darshanamritahai vichedavagraham plana bhakta shasyan yajivayat. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is compared to a cloud that pours water on fields of grain, which are like devotees suffering to a shortage of rain. Separation from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is like a drought, but when the Lord returns, his presence is like a nectarian rain that falls on all the grains and saves them from perishing. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. All glories to Lord Chaitanya. All glories to Lord Nityananda. All glories to Advaita Chandra. All glories to all the devotees of Lord Chaitanya. Gurveyabe Mahaprabhu Chalila Dakshine Prataparudra Rajatabe Ulaila Sarvabhume. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu departed for South India, King Prataparudra called Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to his place. Vasite asana dila kari namaskare. Mahaprabhu ravarta tabe uchila tanhare. When Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya met with the king offered him a seat with all respects and inquired about news of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Shinilhana Tomaragari Eka Godahite Aila Teno Maha Maya. The king said to Bhattacharya, I've heard that a great personality has come from Bengal and is staying at your home. I've also heard that he is very, very merciful. Tumhare bahu kripa kaila kahi sarajana kripa kari karaha more tanhara darshana. I've also heard that this great personality has shown you great favor. At any rate, this is what I hear from many different people. Now, being merciful upon me, you should do me the favor of arranging an interview. Hmm. I actually got to go back to the Bengali. Matakahi. Yeshin hila saba sachakaya. Tanur darshana damara gatana. The Bhattacharya replied, all that you have heard is true, but as far as an interview is concerned, it is very difficult to arrange. Virapta sannyasi tenho, rachena nirjane, swapneha na karena te, raja darashane. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is in the renounced order and is very much detached from worldly affairs. He stays in solitary places, and even in dreams he does not grant interviews to a king. Tatapi prakari toma karai tamadashna sam ilateno dakshina kamana. Still, I would have tried to arrange your interview, but he has recently left to tour South India. Rajakahi. Jagannatha Chari Kene Gila. Bata Kahi. Mahantira Eka Lila. The king asked, why has he left Jagannath Puri? The Bhattacharya replied, such are the pastimes of a great personality. Tirtha Pavitra Karite Kari Tirtha Ramana. Se Chale Nistharayi Samsari Gajana. Great saints go to the holy place of pilgrimage in order to purify them. For that reason, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was visiting many tirthas and delivering many meditation souls. Here's a verse from uh, I think it's from the Bhagavatam. Bhagavad Vida Bhagavatas Tirti Bhuta Swayam Vibho Tirti Goranti Tirtani Swantastena Gadabrita. Saints of your caliber are themselves places of pilgrimage. Because of their purity, they are constant companions of the Lord, and therefore they can purify even the places of pilgrimage. This verse spoken by Maharaj Yudhisthira to Vidura in Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 13th chapter, text 10, is also quoted in the Adi Lila 163. And I told the story before how the Ganges was reluctant to come down to the earth planet when Bhagirath wanted her to come down. And Bhagirath was able to address her objections by stating that you may come down to the earth planet and so many rascals will go bathing in you, but so many pure devotees will bathe in you, and they will purify you of all the impurities of the rascals. So saints purify any place. They can purify a holy place. They can purify a place that's not holy. Because wherever Prabhupada stayed, that place is a holy place. Wherever Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited, that place is a holy place because Lord Chaitanya visited, even if it was a holy place before. When Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was touring southern India, following in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he, that is Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, established Pada Tirthas in each one of those holy places where Lord Chaitanya visited. What is a Pada Tirtha? Pada means feet. So Tirtha means a place by which you can transport yourself back to the spiritual world. Tirtha means to cross. You understand? Just like the Avatara means to cross down. So Tirtha means a crossing place. So he installed imprints of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's feet in all the holy places that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited in South India. And today, if you go to those holy places, which we did several times, you can actually take darshan of the imprint of Lord Chaitanya's feet that were installed by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Even in Tirupati, it's like that. Vaishnavera haya ekasvabhava nischala tenon jivanahena anas Swatantra Ishvara. A Vaishnava travels to places of pilgrimage just to purify them and reclaim the fallen souls. This is one of the duties of a Vaishnava. Actually, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not a living entity, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. Consequently, he is a fully independent controller, yet in his position as a devotee, he carries out the activities of a devotee. So that's a devotee's duty to travel to holy places and all places to actually reclaim people. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur points out that because there are many permanent residents in holy places who do not precisely follow the rules and regulations governing living in a sacred place, exalted devotees have to go to these places to reclaim such persons. Don't we see that, Sometimes in temples, people do things. You have to just purify. This is the business of a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is unhappy to see others materially enmeshed. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught these activities of a Vaishnava, although he is the worshipful deity of all of Vaishnavas, the complete and independent Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is Purna Shuddho Nityamukta, completely uncontaminated and eternally liberated. He is Sanatan, for he has no beginning or end. And also those words, Purna Shuddho Nityamukta, Mukta, are used in relationship with Krishna's holy name. Namachintamani, Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa. Purna Shuddha Nityamukto, Vinatwam Namanamino. That the holy name is non-different from Krishna, the holy name is complete, it is pure, it is eternally liberated, and you get liberated by chanting. Rajakahe Tanre Tumiyaite Kene Dile Ayapari Yatnakari Kene Narakile. Upon hearing this, the king replied, "Why did you allow him to leave? Why did you fall at his lotus feet and keep him here?" But the Charya Kahe, Teno Swayam Ishvara Swatantra, Sakshat Shri Krishna Teno Nahi Paratantra. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya replied, "Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the supreme personality of God himself. He is completely independent. Being Lord Krishna himself, he is not dependent on anyone. Api rakite tanre bahulyatna kailun Ishwarera swatantra icharak ite narilun. Still, I endeavored very hard to keep him here, but because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and completely independent, I was not successful. Rajakai Vatatumi Vigyashiromani Tumi Tanre Krishna Ka Tate Satya Mani. The king said, "Bhattacharya, you are the most learned and experienced person I know. Therefore, when you address Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Lord Krishna, I accept this as truth." And Prabhupada comments that this is the way to advance in spiritual science. One must accept the words of an acharya, bona fide spiritual master, to clear the path for spiritual advancement. This is the secret of success. However, one's guide must be a spiritual master who is actually an unalloyed devotee, strictly following the instructions of the previous acharya without deviation. Whatever the spiritual master says must be accepted by the disciple. Only then is success certain. This is the Vedic system. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was a Brahmana and realized so, whereas Prataparudra was a Kshatriya. Kshatriya kings used to obey very faithfully the orders of learned Brahmanas and saintly persons, and in this way they would rule their country. Similarly, Vaishyas used to follow the king's orders, and Shudras used to serve the three higher castes. In this way, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras used to live cooperatively, performing their respective duties. Consequently, society was peaceful, and people were able to discharge the duties of Krishna consciousness. Thus, they were happy in this life and able to return Got it. So this indicates the checks and balances in the governance of society. Now, even in modern governments, we have some sort of system of checks and balances. For example, in America, you have the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. I think in most countries you have that. And the judges are supposed to be Brahmins. No, really, they're not. They're actually political appointees, but that's another subject matter. But traditionally, it was like that the judges would be Brahmins and they could tell the king what to do, and the king had to do what the Brahmins said. He had to obey the Brahmins. And if he didn't, the Brahmins could get rid of the king. Oh my God. And there's one story in the Bhagavatam, actually several stories, but one story I'd like to tell is the story of Vena. So Vena's father was Marjanga, and Vena was a really bad boy when he was a kid. He used to kill his friends when he went out to play with his friends. Really bad friend to have. And so the father got really disgusted with his son and probably with his wife too, the queen, because they're both the same caliber, had the same qualities. So his father said, I'm taking sannyas, I'm getting the HE out of here. So Marjanga left and the next king was Vena, his bad son. And his bad son was so bad that he wouldn't let the Brahmanas do their duties. The Brahmanas had to worship him as God. He said, I'm God on earth. I'm God on earth. So worship me, don't worship Krishna, don't worship anyone else. And so the Brahmanas thought, this guy has to go. So they wanted to have a coup. Some of you have heard of coups. A coup is when you have a group of people who overthrow the king, overthrow the president. In America, we almost had a coup recently when the past president of the United States was refusing to accept the results of an election. And he had his people attack the Congress of the United States, a mob scene to try to overthrow the rightful person who was going to become the next president, but didn't work. Fortunately, we'll see what happens in the future. So that's a coup. So the Brahmanas decided we got to get rid of this guy. We're not talking about Trump. We're actually talking about Vena. And what the Brahmanas did is they chanted some mantras because they didn't need guns or anything like that. And Vena died immediately. But because there wasn't another king, sometimes people talk about defunding the police. And so if you get rid of the police, then people go wild and start stealing and everything like that. So that's really what was happening. The thieves were running all over the place. And the Brahmins thought, we got to find someone else to be the king. They looked all around, couldn't find anyone. But they saw that Vena's body was still there, preserved. And so they took the genes, that's the DNA. For those who don't know what genes are, genes don't mean pants that you wear like blue jeans. But these DNA. DNA means the hereditary factors that were in the cells of Vena. Because Vena had some good genes and some bad genes. So they genetically cloned Vena. Wow. So cloning was there in those days. So they cloned them, but they were able to genetically alter some of the genes and put them into another person. And that person was known as Bahuka. Anyway, I'm not going to describe who he was. And then using the good genes. So no, the genetic engineering, So a lot of people are against GMO, but you have GMO people right now. So they had two GMO good people, one GMO bad person. And the good people was Prithu and Archie. Actually got a man and his wife from the deal. That's pretty good. You clone the genes, you get a male and a female, and they're married. Wow. And so that's the Brahmana's duty. They could determine who would become the king. Uh, it's not necessarily true that the present king would appoint his eldest son, which is called primogeniture, to be the king, but the Brahmanas would decide who was actually qualified, the most qualified person. And if that person, whoever became the king, wasn't qualified, didn't show himself to have the right qualities, they get rid of him. And that was very, very important. So you had checks and balances like that. So this was a relationship between the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. Very, very important principle. Unfortunately, like I said, in the modern day and age, the so-called Brahmanas, which are the court system in most countries, the court system, the judges, are not actually Brahmanas, they're political appointees. You see this, I don't know how it is in Australia, New Zealand, but at least in America, the judges that are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate in the United States are actually political appointees because they're appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, which both of these bodies are political bodies. So naturally, they're going to appoint people who are politically favorable to them or favor their particular policies. And especially that happens in what we call the Supreme Court of the United States. But the Brahmanas in the Vedic system were never appointed by the king. They were known by their qualities and recognized by other Brahmanas, not by the Kshatriyas. Very, very important. Okay, we'll continue with this. Munarapi Hantan Rahaila Agamana Ekabara Teki Kari Sapalanayana. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returns, I wish to see him just once in order to make my eyes perfect. Atacharya kahe teno asibe alpakale rahite tanre kastana chahiye virale. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya replied, His Holiness, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will return very soon. I wish to have a nice place ready for him, a place solitary and peaceful. Kurera nikatara haibe nirjane e mata nirnayakari dehaikastane. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's residence should be very secluded and also near the temple of Jagannath. Please consider this proposal. Give me a nice place for him. Raja Kahe. So whenever you have Kahe, that means Raja Kahe means the king spoke. Kahe. So you remember that word. Aiche Kashi Mishrera Pavana Takurera Nikatahaya Paraman Hirjana. The king replied, Kashi Mishra house is exactly what you require. It is near the temple and it's very secluded, calm. Etakahi Rajakrahi Utkantitahana Acharya Kashi Mishre Kahila Hasya. After saying this, the king became very anxious for the Lord to return. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya then went to Kashi Mishra to convey the king's desire. Kashi Mishra Kahe, remember the word Kahe means Ami Vara Bhagyapan Muragrihe Prabhu Padera Habe Avashtana. When Kashi Mishra heard the proposal, he said, I am very fortunate that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu of all Prabhus stay at my home. In this verse, the word Prabhupada, referring to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is significant. Regarding this, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada comments, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, Sri Krishna, and all his servants address him as Prabhupada. This means that there are many Prabhus taking shelter under his lotus feet. So this is very important. So when we call our Srila Prabhupada, it means many, many gurus are taking shelter at his feet. In other words, he's the guru of gurus. Just like you said, the Lord of Lords. So, as far as gurus, we refer to someone as Prabhupada when he's the guru of many gurus. That's what Prabhupada means. Also, the word Prabhupada can sometimes mean he who has taken shelter at the ultimate Prabhu's lotus feet. Ultimate Prabhu is Krishna, of course. Prabhu means master. So, the pure Vaishnava is addressed as Prabhu. And this address is an etiquette observed between Vaishnavas. And actually, the feminine of that is Prabhu. When many Prabhus remain under the shelter of the lotus feet of another Prabhu, this address, Prabhupada, is given. Sri Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu are also dressed as Prabhupada. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, that means great master, Sri Advaita Prabhu, and Sri Nityananda Prabhu are all Vishnu Tattva, the Supreme Personality of God, the Lord Vishnu. Therefore, all living entities are under their lotus feet. Lord Vishnu is the eternal Lord of everyone, and, hold on a second, and the representative of Lord Vishnu is the Lord's confidential servant. Such a person acts as the spiritual master for neophyte Vaishnavas. Therefore, the spiritual master is as respectable as Sri Caitanya, Krishna Chaitanya, or Lord Vishnu himself. For this reason, the spiritual master is addressed as Om Vishnupad or Prabhupada. The Acharya, the spiritual master, is generally respected by others as Shripad, and the initiated Vaishnavas are addressed as Prabhu. Prabhupada, and Vishnupad are described in revealed scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrta, and Chaitanya Bhagavat. In this regard, these scriptures present evidence accepted by unalloyed devotees. I'll tell you a very funny story about ISKCON. Well, it's a sad story too. When Prabhupada left this world in 1977, then those who took on the position of guru thought that they should all have a pod name, because no one could take the name of Prabhupada because that was reserved for Prabhupada. So we had some people called Vishnupad, some called Chaitanya Pod, some Acharya Dev, some Acharya Pod, and of course, following in their footsteps, this is a comment. Following in their footsteps, I said when I started accepting disciples in 1985, I should have a pod name too. Please give me a pod name. I want to keep up with the pods. It's actually quite funny keeping up with the pods because I didn't want to be called just like generically, which is generic. I wanted to something special like everybody else. So Chaitanya Pod, Acharya Pod, Vishnu Pod, all those were already taken. So what am I going to be called? What pod am I going to be? It's actually funny. What feet am I going to be? So I took the name Shripad. I thought, that's really cool. I want to be called Shripad. Shri is very respectable, when you call someone Shri this or Shri that, Shri that. It's a very respectful. So Shripad, that means basically Shri is the name of Lakshmi, so Lakshmi feet or opulent feet, whatever. So uh, anyway, I took that name for about a few months, and then ISKCON, we passed resolutions. So someone remembers that. Who's that Christian people? So then we passed a resolution. No one should have a special name. Because then, everybody was trying for pod names or Dave names or whatever names. It was like a competition. And I had claimed the Shripad name. And no one else could take it. And I was special. So anyways, it is not appropriate. It was decided in ISKCON, it was not appropriate for someone to have special names because it really took attention away from Prabhupada and presented someone else as a big acharya. And so the GBC passed a rule, which I agree with. Still, some devotees nowadays really are just hanging on to the past pod or caves, whatever name, potted pod, feet of the feet. Anyway, some are just hanging on to the names because of habit, but it's really not appropriate. Because the whole idea in ISKCON, not the whole idea, but an important concept in ISKCON is that Prabhupada is at the center, and we have our individual gurus, but we have our individual spiritual masters. But this is our personal relationship. Like we shouldn't canvas for our spiritual master, and we shouldn't try to present our spiritual masters better than others, even though in our own heart there's our devotion, etc., like that. And then, it's a special relationship, but that's a personal relationship. It's not that different football teams who have their different mascots fight, like if one football team is the alligators, crocodiles, another one is the Yogi Bears or something like that. And they're all fighting for supremacy or more recognition. So when you have these special names, it actually is, at least subconsciously, an attempt by the followers to put, maybe habit too, but it's a subconscious attempt by the followers to put their guru on a higher position, which actually interferes with what? The unity of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Because if we want to continue with the unified society for the next 10,000 years at least, or whatever number of years is practical, then it has to be based on a central factor. And that's Prabhupada, who's the ultimate Siksha source for ISKCON. So this pod or Dave name actually interferes with basically the strategy in the Krishna consciousness movement. It really does, because it just establishes a hierarchy of gurus, and we don't have a hierarchy. We have a hierarchy, but Prabhupada is there, and we are all servants of Prabhupada. It's a really important point, and that's a little bit of history of ISKCON that at least I had to live through. Some of you did not live through it. I lived through it and survived. It's pretty good. I mean, I can tell you so many stories, but not for sharing in class, about the guru days in ISKCON. And it was traumatic for many of us. But I lived and I survived. I'm a veteran. So anyway, let's just continue, finish this chapter, and then we'll see what happens. Finish this verse. The Prakrita Sahajas are not even worthy of being called Vaishnavas. They think that only caste Goswamis should be called Prabhupada. Such ignorant Sahajas call themselves Vaishnava Dasa Anudas, which means the servant of the Vaishnavas. C.C. Madhya Lila, 1380. However, they are opposed to addressing a pure Vaishnava as Prabhupada. Of course, Prabhupada here is referring to his situation where he's being addressed as Prabhupada, but this is important for the unity of the movement. In other words, Prabhupada, it's not that Prabhupada wanted some big title, like we want some big title. Oh, GBC, big this, big that. Or even people say, Prabhupada disciple, because they want to have a big title. But Prabhupada wanted this title because he wanted the unity of our society. Therefore, he wanted to be the only one in the movement with a Dave or a Pod title. In other words, they are envious of a bona fide spiritual master. Prabhupada is here referring to perhaps some of his godbrothers. Not perhaps, I know. Because they became very upset. I mean, one time, they all surrounded Prabhupada and just were really like angry at Prabhupada. You've taken his name, Prabhupada! How can you take the name? And Prabhupada, being very expert, said, I've not taken the name. My disciples address me like this. And the reason the disciples started to address him as Prabhupada is at one time, Prabhupada told one of the disciples, I believe it was Govindadasi, that The Swamiji title, which is the title that we're using for Prabhupada, is like a third class appellation. Swamiji this, Swamiji that, G, G, G. Sometimes people address me and say, G. That's short for respectable, but it's actually just not really high class. Yes, G, no G. Whatever you want, G, as long as I agree. G. People say that to me sometimes. But anyways, the Prabhupada said, this is a third class appellation. And the devotee said, well, what should we call you? And Prabhupada said, generally the spiritual master addresses Vishnu Pad. And Prabhupada said, and the devotee said, we call you Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, yes. So it actually came from the devotees when Prabhupada was explaining the nomenclature. In other words, they're envious of a bona fide spiritual master who is addressed as Prabhupada, and they commit offenses by considering a bona fide spiritual master an ordinary human being or member of a certain caste, because they looked at Prabhupada's background, which is offensive. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur describes such sahajas as most unfortunate because of their misconception. They fall, into a hellish condition. Prabhupada's being very heavy here. So we'll end with text 23. And now we will give you the opportunity for 8 more minutes because I have to do my exercise today, which I haven't done. I've been absorbed at GBC meetings all day long for service to Prabhupada. Okay, so we will allow you to unmute yourself. So who has a coherent question?
I have a question, please.
Yeah.
So in the purport Prabhupada of Chaitanya, one of the verses in Caitanya Caritamrta,
you have two devices wherever you have 2 devices wherever you are on the class. So
he says
one of them, yeah.
That whoever is a bona fide spiritual master takes on the name Vishnu Acharya Deva Gurudev.
Yeah.
So
Gurudev, but Prabhupada said that the GBC is the ultimate managing authority of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness.
Yeah.
So in order to keep the center of Prabhupada, we've decided that people to use the word Gurudev as a generic term. So, yes, it's true. Prabhupada's speaking philosophically, and it's absolutely true. At the same time, there's the application, which Srila Prabhupada gave us the ability to decide to keep the movement together. I mean, many times Prabhupada say things theoretically, like that sannyasis should wear deer skin or go naked, and we don't do that. And many times Prabhupada said things many times theoretically in his book that are meant to be applied according to time, place, and circumstance. And that's called hermeneutics. You can't take things out of context. You take things out of context because the ultimate, if you understand the highest point is to actually keep the unity of the movement. And if we say, well, generally the spiritual master should be Prabhupada, we have other people being called Prabhupada in the movement, it will actually be a disaster. And then if we have a competition like we did for different Pod or Dave names, it actually establishes a hierarchy which is actually counterproductive to keeping the movement together. So there's higher principles and lower principles.
Originally, you chose the name Gurudev.
I know that's a generic name, and I keep that name. That's generic. Everybody's Gurudev. But I chose Sripad because I wanted a special name because I wanted to be distinguished as better than everybody else, as higher, as special.
Yeah. Right.
That's right. I said, I need a special name because keeping up with the other pods. I wanted to keep up with the other pods, like when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I didn't want to be just an ordinary Gurudev. I wanted to be a pod.
So when you went back to Gurudev, you want to get criticized?
When I went back to Gurudev, I felt humble. I felt Trinadapi Sunichena Turoriva Sihushnana Amanina Manadena Kirtiya Sadari. I was able to chant the holy names constantly. Instead of when I took a Shripad name, I was thinking Shripad, 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 Shripad. I am Shripad. I am Shripad.
Yeah,
And
right.
then when I gave up that Upadi, that's nice, Upadi. That's another pod name. Instead, you can call me Upadi. That's pretty good. Actually, I didn't even think of that joke before it just came out. So someone someone attached to a pod name can be called Upadi. So actually, my best jokes come out spontaneously. So so when I gave that up, I felt liberated because now I'm just a servant of Krishna. Gopi Bharata Padakamala Dasa Dasa Dasanudas. No
You said we
special name.
shouldn't. You also said we shouldn't call our guru by his name. So how do we
That's right.
refer to him?
Gurudev,
How
Ma
do we?
Gurudev, Ma
So how do
Ma
we refer? So
Ma
how does one
Ma
refer to the guru to others if they can't, if they have to use his name?
Ma Gurudev Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya also Teta Sata Shri Shimad, His Divine Grace Om, the greatest in the world, Gurudev. How about that one?
Mm-hmm.
Now you refer to my spiritual master, His Holiness, or His Grace, whatever. That's the proper etiquette. My Guru, my Guru. He belongs to me. My Guru belongs to me. He's completely under my control.
Big
So
trouble.
Gurudev, I
that's a
had a
big problem.
question.
Uh-oh, we're getting like
I,
challenges here. All right, so
no, I'm
what's the
not
question?
challenging. I had an
It's
important
addressing
point
the
to bring up.
Shripadi, Shripadini.
We're all getting in on this.
Her Grace Krishna
Yeah.
Priya Devi Dasi has a question. So my point that I wanted to actually have you reflect on, because it is an important point. It's not so much exact, as far as the pod names, but my point is that I'm reflecting upon is the concept of the pendulum swing. So we know
Yeah.
after Srila Prabhupada left the planet, that we had, 11 vyasanas being built in the temple room and
Yeah.
simultaneous guru pujas. And then there were so many difficulties. So, of course, in reaction to that, we had the guru reform. But along with that, over time, so also the pendulum went the other way, where there was a tendency to not have the proper respect shown to one's guru, according to what is the Vedic culture. And then when there's not that respect, then one, without certain respect there, one can't hear as well. So that was one of my concerns, like the
Yeah.
whole pendulum swing that went that way. And also how we know that Srila Prabhupada is, the founder of Acharya in the center, and everyone does and can have an intimate relation. But also sometimes you will hear the disciples of the present gurus feel that, are they not going to have that opportunity to also have a devotional, inward devotional relationship with their own guru? Is their own guru being minimized in different ways? So I just thought maybe you can address that whole concept of the swinging pendulum and how to come to
Yeah.
the balance.
I think the pendulum did swing, and now I think it's in the middle. I do not find, in general, any lack of respect in dealing with my own disciples, because I just have a generic name. Uh, actually, I found that people generally long-term respect some of their qualities rather than their title.
Well, I wasn't meaning by the name. I wasn't speaking about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
names. I was speaking in general.
I think in general, things reach a happy pendulum swings both ways, and then it sort of gets to the center after a while. And I've seen in ISKCON. Uh, yes, after we had Guru reform, then it's swung the other way that the gurus were disrespected. Uh, Many of the gurus were disrespected. But now I see in ISKCON that the gurus are generally respected. I mean, at least by their followers and by devotees in general. I don't have any issues myself or any concerns with this. I find that people examine someone on their own merits now, which is actually even.
So would you say everything's become more mature now?
I think
People
everything's
are
much
having more mature understanding.
yeah, I think everything's much more mature. And my concern with this whole thing, there's a lot of noise in the background. My concern with
Where's
let's
that
just
all that noise coming from?
let me just check to see where it's coming from. I can see right here. It's coming from Tulsi Devi Dasi, which I'm muting right now. She's always making noise. Anyway, so I just muted her. My concern is that Prabhupada be in the center, and the gurus have the relationship with the disciples, and those love the gurus, hopefully, according to the guru's own qualities. It can't be a blind thing. I think I'd like to get away from the point that if someone takes the name of guru, that automatically uh, gives disciples an understanding that they're on the highest platform of devotional service. Um, we should
Good
see a
point.
person. Yeah, we should see a person's qualities. I think too much of this nomenclature stuff. You know, who's that? Who's making the noise? Anyway, too much of this nomenclature stuff really blinds people to reality. Uh, I think in general the guru should be seen as far as how much they help you in devotional service. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his initiating guru was Vipini Vihari Goswami, and his Siksha guru was Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, and Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj was considered more prominent in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life than Vipini Vihari Goswami. So I think relationships have to be practical and based upon not a ceremony, but based upon relationship and how much someone is helping us in devotional service. I think if we get too much into the ritualistic aspect or the nomenclature, we can actually lose sight of Krishna consciousness. That's why I talk about these titles and everything like that. We lose sight. Uh, I know some of my initiating disciples consider other people to be more prominent in their lives, and some of devotees who were initiated by someone else consider me more prominent in their lives. So I think that we have to establish more of a dynamic relationship based rather than a nomenclature based a dynamic in ISKCON. Does that make sense?
Makes very good sense. I really appreciate you explaining things in a clear way. I feel it's really important and in the devotee's life also, so that they don't feel confused or conflicted at different times.
Yeah, really. The person who helps us most in our spiritual life is the most prominent guru, and the person who's situated properly. And the Diksha guru sometimes may take a secondary position to the person who helps us the most, or maybe in a primary position. I think relationships have to be defined by relationships. Like many times, the GBC has passed resolutions that go against relationships. For example, the GBC may say Prabhupada should be the most prominent person in your life, but you can't really legislate relationships. How can you legislate a relationship? You know, whoever is the most prominent person spiritually is the most prominent person. Whether it's your initiating guru, whether it's your temple president, or whether it's some other great saintly person, or maybe it's Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's too much of this like ritualistic legislation and nomenclature stuff. Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, I guess for people who are not Brahmanas, they have to function on that level. But myself, I'd rather function on the level of relationship rather on the level of nomenclature. And you know, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm just not gonna, because there's some rule passed. I'm not gonna accept someone as more. Of course, Prabhupada is the most prominent person, but it's not because the GBC decided it. Yeah, that would be weird. It's because he is. That's the relationship. And for some other people, their initiating guru may be the most prominent person, or their sixth guru may be the most prominent. You in the sense that things have to be much more fluid. You know, as I
That's
hear all
great.
this,
Thank you. Very good explanation.
sometimes I hear so many times these rules that, you know, you have to accept this person as your most prominent Siksha guru or whatever. But it's not like that. It's when you're dealing with the heart, you're dealing with the heart, and you're dealing with the soul. So those things are above rules and regulations. Rules and regulations are good for things like, you know, the 10 offenses, the 4 regulated principles, chant 16 rounds. You know, those are fantastic things. But who inspires you the most in Krishna consciousness? It's hard to say. Okay, that's very interesting. We had a very interesting discussion. I have to go and exercise and have my relationship with the sun right now. I have to do some Surya Namaskar before the sun goes down and prolong my life a little longer. Okay, on that happy note, all glories to divine. Well, if I remember correctly, many of you begged you to accept Sripad, but you refused until we convinced you. Am I remembering this correctly? Yes, I am very humble. You remember my humility perfectly.